For more than a century, various companies have been set up to generate electricity in Nigeria. Today, the concerns about the quantity and quality of electric supply is still persists. United Nations estimates that more than half of families living in Nigeria still do not have stable power supply. In 2013, the power sector was unbundled with a hope to light up Nigeria. Now, the President Buhari administration has shown that it is ready, willing, and able to explore another alternative. As time, the plan is to work with Siemens to improve the electricity value chain. On the news tonight, to discuss the present and future possibilities in the electricity sector is Babajide Ogusanwo, Channel Television's information consultant. Babajide.
Good evening.
A table prepared before us. Thanks for joining us on the news at 10 tonight. We've talked about, well, we're talking electricity supply, electricity generation, electricity supply today. How difficult can it be? It's not just about setting an agenda now. It's how difficult can it be to provide electricity for Nigerians?
So have we gotten to the promised land? No, we haven't. But is this government making progress? The evidence suggests that, yes, we are. But today it's about sharing. And so I brought this for you. So that you could have this. But tonight I would like to talk about three things, and listen carefully to this. The first is I'd like to talk about the significance of the Eid. I'm talking about the celebration. The second is what lessons can leaders learn from the Eid? And the third is when will Nigerians celebrate stable power supply? And because tonight we really have three categories of Nigerians. The first category are those that are watching us with public electricity, watching us and eating their meat with public electricity. The second category of Nigerians are those that are watching, eating their meat, but on generators. And the third are people like you that have no meat. And that's why we have this. But on the significance of the Eid represents three things. What are these three things? The first thing it represents is tea. Now, what do I mean by tea when we're looking at the Eid? It represents trust. We're looking at how Abraham and Ishmael went to make that sacrifice, and the Eid represents trust. The second thing it represents is obedience, and that is obeying by Abraham obeying the message from God. And the third is promises. Keep your promises. And Abraham kept his promise, and eventually we have Ibrahim kept his promises, and eventually we have this. So it's trust, obedience, and promises. So I'd like to talk about, since we're talking about promises, let's look at the top promises the president made on electricity, since it's the season of fulfilling promises. And if you look at those top three promises that the president has made in 2019, if you look at that campaign manifesto clearly, we'll see and identify the things he had said. Number one on that list was that we're going to have an incremental power supply of 1,000 megawatt generation on the grid every year. That's the first promise we have in the manifesto. What is the second promise? The second promise is we are looking at an improvement in power generation from 7,000 megawatts to 10,000 megawatts in 4 years. That's the second promise the president made, which we can see in the manifesto. And what is the final promise, which is what Nigerians are really looking up towards? And that is a view to achieve 24/7 uninterrupted power supply within 5 years. So based on the promises of the government, we should expect uninterrupted power supply, hopefully, from 2024. Is the government on track to achieve that? There are challenges, but there's certainly going to be progress compared to where we are today. So clearly, the forecast is the days ahead, even though we may not be able to get to that level of power supply generation, but we're certain that it's going to improve.
Yeah, that's a lot of hope, though. But investors are concerned about the nation's electricity sector. How can we douse those concerns that they have?
You know, for investors, they really want higher returns on their capital. And so if we look at the amount of external capital that has come into Nigeria, 2014 to 2018, we'll notice that the telecommunications sector, for instance, has received over $3 billion in external capital. But the electrical sector, within 5 years, less than $500 million. So the challenge is, clearly for external investors, the electrical sector doesn't look attractive. That is why Siemens has been called to be able to come in to make it more attractive by looking at all aspects of the value chain, working with the generation companies, the transmission company, and the distribution companies to be able to improve that value. And one insight we can get is let's take a look at the top 3 facts of the electricity sector, which shows some of the challenges that investors are bothered about. The first fact shows that currently, or before the privatization, we had only 3.3 million metered customers as at 2013. Today, we have 4 million meters, but that is still insufficient because we have 50 million families that should be metered. Only 4 million meters today out of 50 million meters that are required. In other words, only 8 out of 100 Nigerians have meters. That is the first concern that investors have. How do you get your money back in a nation where 92% of those that should be metered don't have meters? The second is the cost of public power, 26 naira per kilowatt hour. The countries that we look up to that have stable electricity supply, most of them have significantly higher tariffs. In other words, President Buhari isn't necessarily the problem. It is the structure of the reward system to investors. The final fact, which shows why investors are also concerned, is that today 1 megawatt of power can serve up to 500 families. However, we are not looking at incremental power supply, or rather, over the years, several governments haven't looked at incremental power supply. So today, even though we are aiming for 10,000, 11,000, 25,000 megawatts, we need to look at it from an incremental step. Again, if we're able to generate an additional megawatt, 1 megawatt of power supply can give us or can power up to 500 homes.
Well, we can talk about electricity from now until the lights go out, but we're not going to do that tonight. Thanks a lot, and thanks for bringing me dinner.
But in the final analysis, let's not forget, today is really about sharing. This is not just for you. We need to share to our neighbors, and if we can remember all of these numbers, remember trust, obedience, promises. The celebration today is a reminder that all leaders should fulfill the promises, and we've seen the promises of the electrical sector. But again, the forecast shows that we're going to be generating much more than we have done in the past.
Thankfully, you've looked into your ball. Thanks again, Babajide.
The pleasure is always mine.